We're also very fortunate to have the next panel. LA Times editor-in-large Jim Newton, in conversation with State Senate President Darrell Steinberg and former Speaker of the Assembly and now Congresswoman Karen Bass, looking at specific solutions that they're going to suggest. As many of you may know, Jim Newton is really one of the premier journalists in the nation. He's a member of the LA Times editorial board, writes a weekly column on policy and politics in Southern California for the Times. He was previously editor of the entire editorial pages for the Times, which meant that he supervised the editorial board, the op-ed pages, Sunday opinion and letters to the editor. He's previously been a reporter, an editor, and a bureau chief. He's also the author of 2 books, which I can highly recommend to you. The first, Justice for All, Earl Warren and the Nation He Made, and the second, Eisenhower, the White House Years. And Earl Warren, I thought I knew quite a bit about him, but I learned a lot from the book. And on Eisenhower, the White House Years, I'd had a general impression of General Eisenhower in World War II and the Normandy landings, and I had a general impression that he was always reticent on civil rights, but I really didn't get an overall view, and so if you haven't read them, I really recommend them. So I think we're fortunate to have a panel of this stature. Jim and the panel, would you come up?
Thank you.
You all right?
Thank you, Conway.
Really great to be here.
Thank you, Conway. Thank you all. It is really a pleasure to be with all of you here today. It's always nice to be in Bob's house. Thank you, Bob, for your facility. For the balance of this hour, we're going to talk to these 2 really leading lawmakers who've devoted so much time and energy and intelligence to poverty and society's obligation to poor people and especially children. They really don't need much of an introduction. You've already heard a fair bit about Congresswoman Bass, but let me just briefly tell you who you're about to hear from. As you've just heard, Congresswoman Bass is national leader on foster care, poverty issues. Indeed, as long as I've known her, which is a fairly long time now, she's been preoccupied with helping children, especially poor children. She created the bipartisan Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth and authored legislation to help students receive financial aid, as well as to ease the burden of student loan debt and to prevent the trafficking of youth in foster care. And also, as you've heard, she was also the first African-American woman to serve as the Speaker of the California Assembly, and I believe the first African-American woman ever to lead a legislative body in this country, so congratulations. And also, to Congresswoman Bass's right, is Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg. As President Pro Tem of the California State Senate, Senator Steinberg leads his majority party in that body, and as such has really played an important role in almost every important issue confronting the state in recent years. He's been a member of the legislature since 1998, which is pretty much an epic in the term limits era. And he's one of the rare leaders up there in Sacramento who, at least in my view, has really strived to make progress, not just to score political points. He's been active in issues relating to education and economic growth. He's instrumental in helping turn around the really daunting state budget deficit and shortfall of a few years ago into the surpluses that we're now suddenly enjoying. He's also, importantly, a leading champion for programs to improve mental health care. He was, for instance, the author of Proposition 63, the Mental Health Services Act, which created a $1 billion system for delivering mental health care here in California. And before we turn to their questions, if I can just add a personal note, my job puts me in contact with a lot of city, county, state, and federal officials. I'm here to tell you that these are 2 of the finest. I am really pleased to be with them here today, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming them. Please. Well, since I believe the mayor has left the room, I thought I'd start by asking you to react to something he said here today, which is He seemed to indicate that if Barack Obama and Newt Gingrich can kind of be on the same place in this, that maybe there's the opportunity for some coalition around really doing something about poverty and children's poverty. I don't know whether to be heartened or sort of appalled to find Newt Gingrich in that camp, but I wonder, maybe I start with you, Congresswoman, do you sense an atmosphere in Washington that is open to real constructive change on issues related to poverty?
Well, I do think that there are some openings. So for example, when I work on child welfare issues, I'm just in my third year, but I've spent my first 2 years really forging relationships with Republicans. And there is a core of the most conservative Republicans who support child welfare issues. So I think if it was the general category of poverty, the short answer would be no, but there are aspects of poverty that you can bring people together on, and I do think child welfare is one. Now, I have a concern, though, and actually it's in the other direction, which is some of my Republican colleagues, most notably Paul Ryan, is now beginning, because you know they're trying to remake the party. They keep saying that, but they really can't bring themselves. I mean, there's some words that they can't say, like citizenship. But anyway, so they do want to, he's talking about addressing poverty, and he's come out with his plans, and it's pretty much in terms of the ideological thinkers, it's Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor. But if you look just below their rhetoric, their solution for poverty is essentially the bootstraps without giving you the boots. So we can all do it on a voluntary basis. Our churches and our community organizations can really all do it. It should all be based on voluntarism. And so what I'm excited about is next year is the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us to really jump out and aggressively define these issues, because we absolutely cannot concede these issues to the right. But I do have to say that I'm so happy to be here with my partner. We went through such tough times together trying to prevent our state from collapsing. And we served together through those tough times. So I'm really happy that you all brought the two of us together again.
Yes. Senator Steinberg, how about Sacramento? Opportunities for bipartisanship around any of these issues, or is that still just a non-starter? Or does it matter?
You don't need
the Democrats?
Well,
Yeah, right.
let me just say my thank yous first. First of all, to Conway and Dr. Ross, and what a great pleasure to be with my friend, Karen Bass. We were the two leaders in the most challenging year, arguably in modern state history, at least when it came to the state budget. And to be joined by my colleagues, Mark DeSaulnier and Sheila Kuehl, I'm just thrilled to be here. So, here's the irony of the situation. I'm not a hyper-partisan, right? I mean, I'm a partisan, but I believe, like Congresswoman Bass, you have to reach across the aisle. Having said that, what has created more bipartisanship than anything has been one party gaining the supermajority. It's kind of true, because before that phenomena and before Prop 25 passed, which allowed for the majority vote budget, the minority party, there are always individuals in the minority party who want to act differently, but they're constrained a little bit by their own groupthink. Since, though, Prop 25 passed, and we have these supermajorities, and there can no longer be that bad word in politics, leverage, which leverage can sometimes be a good thing, but since there has not been that opportunity, and times are a little bit better, I find now Republicans crossing over on a whole wide range of issues, including at the state level immigration issues. I'll give you an example. I authored a bill this last year that made it a civil private right of action for an employer to discriminate against or to retaliate against an undocumented immigrant by reporting them to the immigration authorities if the worker complained about an unsafe workplace condition. This was a bill, given the private right of action and given the fact you're dealing with undocumented immigrants, that would have been a party line vote with some Democrats laying off the bill. Not this last year. We had Republican votes, and we had all of the Democratic votes. And I think it's because there isn't that opportunity to leverage that some of the members who want to vote their districts and their consciences are more free to do so. And so I don't know what happens. I think with Prop 25, so long as there's a majority vote budget when it comes to the restoration of dental care for the poor, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to child welfare, I think that there are great opportunities for bipartisanship because there's now less of a incentive to try to do a gotcha from the minority party to the majority party.
Before we go on, I should have said at the outset, we'd love to take questions from all of you. There are cards, I believe, that are available to you, so if you have a question as we're talking, write it down. We have a relatively brief time today, so do it fast, and then someone will deliver it up to me in a minute here, I think. Big theme here today, I guess, is really to talk about specific ideas, programs, initiatives that could make a tangible difference in the area of poverty, and particularly children's poverty. Are there such things before either the legislature or the Congress, or that you're aware of specific ideas that people in this room and yourselves ought to be advancing over the next couple of years? So, Senator, why don't you start?
Well, I can tell you my latest passion, and it centers around a fundamental transformation of our public education system. Talked a lot about preschool here, and I'm going to introduce the preschool bill in the legislature this year. We've got transitional kindergarten. We now need to have it for the other 3/4 of the 4-year-olds who weren't included. But that's one piece of it, but I'm talking about a different kind of transformation. We have a culture in this state and in this country where we separate high-wage job opportunities and the modern economy and public education. We have not only a disproportionately high high school dropout rate, we have too many kids graduating without the requisite education and skills to be able to succeed in higher education and the workforce. I believe we must fundamentally change our high school education system to combine rigor and relevance. Linked learning. Every child ought to have a career pathway that they're not bound to, but that is sufficiently rigorous and exciting and relevant that they wouldn't think twice about dropping out of school because the education is engaging them. In last year's budget, Senator DeSaulnier and I and my colleagues were successfully able to gain $250 million, the single highest investment of this kind in state history, for what we call Career Education Trust Fund. The money administered by Superintendent Torlakson is going to go out at the beginning of the year. Industry high schools coming together, applying for seed funding to create pathways, to change curriculum so that it's rigorous and relevant, to train teachers, to hire mentors, to provide internships, mentorships, after-school programs, higher education assistance, and ultimately a high-wage job in the industry. We spend billions of dollars in our state on workforce development. And it's an overstatement, but most of it is remediating failure. We need to take the European model. There are a lot of things about Europe and its economy I wouldn't want to take. But we ought to take the European model, and we need to begin apprenticing young people without tracking them, rigor and relevance, so that any kid can go to college. Begin apprenticing kids at age 14, 15, and 16. And they will be better prepared for college, for apprenticeship, and for the workforce, and we'll have a lower dropout rate. $250 million. And if we have a good year again this year, Senator DeSaulnier, I want to get another $250 million and begin changing the nature of high school. One idea.
Before we come to you, Congressman, let me just ask you one little follow-up there, Senator. How long do you envision a program like that taking to begin to have a real effect on the lives of real children today? Because one of the things that's so difficult, it seems to me, about this issue is programs that pay off 5, 6, 7 years from now, that we lose a whole bunch of children in the meantime. How soon do you see the results from something like that?
Well, I think there's two parts to the question, if I might break it down. I see an immediate impact. 40% of kids in California now have access to pathway programs. And those that are out there are good, but most of them are not great. They haven't evolved to be the soup to nuts approach, where the curriculum is really integrated with the biotech pathway, the healthcare pathway, the construction pathway. And so when we get that money out and those pathways are created, we will help thousands of kids right away. Having said that, the second part of your question might be, how do we change the culture so that this is the norm as opposed to just the exception? And I say Europe's been doing this for a couple hundred years. So I'd give us 10. That's my view. I think it's going to take, I don't know, a generation. If we're really serious about workforce and integrating workforce with education, I think it's going to take a generation to where this becomes the norm as opposed to the niche or the exception to the rule.
Congresswoman, I cut you off earlier. Your thoughts on specific programs, ideas that people can be advancing now that will make a difference?
Yeah, but I will answer that.
Please.
But I also think, in terms of what the realistic environment in Washington, D.C. is and how different it is. I do think that the people in this room and all of us, the work that's been done over the years, we know what it is that needs to be done, and it has to be a comprehensive, holistic approach. And so education is absolutely key. I could run through all of the things, that are needed, that we know is needed, but I think that having a comprehensive approach, a wraparound approach, what we tend to do is we will tend to do a program or tend to have an issue area. Maybe it's focusing on education, maybe it's focusing on healthcare, maybe it's focusing on social services. I believe it's all of the above, but wrapped around in a coordinated fashion. And so one of the things that we're attempting to do in DC, because we know that when you have a party that comes in and says their number one objective is to prevent the president from being reelected, and then when the president gets reelected, they're completely disoriented because they had no plan B. So we're stuck in this situation where they don't really know what to do. Now, there was a little light at the tunnel, in a way, last weekend when I guess the speaker decided to be speaker and the Republicans thought that it might be a novel concept to govern. And so we had a budget that was passed. I don't know how long that's going to last. That might be just political, which I think that it is. So we got to have a plan A and a plan B. So plan A would obviously be legislation, if we could do legislation. If we could do legislation, the first thing I would do would be to extend unemployment benefits and not cut $40 billion out of food stamps. We passed the budget last week. I voted against it because I couldn't in good conscience know that 300,000 Californians would lose their unemployment a couple of days after Christmas, okay? When I go back, we're gonna negotiate, should we cut $40 billion out of food stamps or $4 billion? And should we require food stamp recipients to go and get drug tested and work? My Republican colleagues don't understand that people on food stamps already work. That's just completely outside of their experience. And so I really believe that it is the comprehensive, holistic approach. But so what our plan B is then, is that if we can't get things done legislatively, and the president has said this several times, he wants to work through executive order. And so since he said that, I have an executive order for him. and that's an executive order related to child welfare, because again, I think that's one aspect of poverty to address. And so I'm trying to now organize to get him to embrace this executive order that essentially does call for this comprehensive approach. My vision would be for him to have a press conference and call all the child welfare directors from around the country in and talk about how we are going to bring all of the federal agencies that interface with kids in the child welfare system and have them work in a coordinated fashion. One of the things that I think we have done culturally as part of our American culture that is really wrong is we will create a program and we'll expect it to make miracles in 5 years, and then as soon as it's showing some progress, we'll say, oh, problem solved, and now let's do another program. So that's why I would advocate for a comprehensive, holistic approach to bring together all of the programs and strategies and theories that we already know.
You mentioned food stamps. A couple of people mentioned food stamps. It used to be a sort of elegant political device for food stamps. Right? You had food stamps paired with farm subsidies, and one delivered agricultural areas and the other delivered urban support, and that together there was a sufficient coalition to make that happen year after year. What happened? How did that break down?
Well, it broke down for a couple of reasons. One, I do believe that, some people think that food stamps are wrong. And I mean, all that is doing is creating dependency. I mean, it's like, can I teach you arithmetic? I mean, just do the math. How do you think people are loving food stamps and wanting to be on food stamps? But, so anyway, so what they did was they split the farm bill up, took food stamps out, and on the same day these jokers voted to cut $40 billion in food stamps, they voted personally for their own farm subsidies. So we have members of Congress that personally voted for like $1 million for themselves and their family who own farms. So the reason they broke it up, again, was because the Tea Party wing really wanted to do away with the program completely. And as long as it was joined, then that created a problem.
Senator, one of the things that some of the studies, and I'm sure people talked about here this morning, point to as a problem, a particular problem in California, is under-enrollment in programs that people are available for, whether it's food stamps or CalWorks or some of the other programs that could deliver benefits to people. Are there particular issues confronting California with respect to enrollment that there are ways to solve? Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. We do not draw down nearly the resources, the match we'd be eligible to draw down from the federal government. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a great example. Food stamps is another great example.
Earned income tax credit that they'd like to end.
That they would like to end. I just want to say parenthetically, as I was listening to Congresswoman Bass talk about Washington, D.C., I so wish that she could be in the legislative leadership in Sacramento during the good times.
I know.
Because having,
what happened. I
but
go to
having
DC.
worked having worked through the tough times, because she'd be on the cutting edge of actually creating that holistic approach.
Yeah.
And it does remind us that power matters.
Yes, it does.
That elections matter, that all the good policy in the world can't get done, even with great people in Washington, D.C., if you don't have the working majorities and the power. But having said that, it's not an excuse, but I think it's partly true that one of the lesser spoken about impacts of budget cuts over many, many years is it frays the infrastructure. It limits the ability to conduct the outreach. It makes it difficult to enforce our existing consumer protection laws, labor laws, and makes it more difficult to outreach, especially to low-income communities, to ensure that they do sign up. It's another reason, and so it's another reason why, the conventional wisdom now in California is that don't dare overreach now that you have these surpluses and majorities. I get it, as I always say, that lesson learned, we take it in, but here's the equal danger. Don't underreach.
Right.
Don't be so scared that we're going to lose by not stepping up, stepping out, and making sure that we do smart things, like make sure that when it comes to Covered California and the Earned Income Tax Credit and food stamps, that we're drawing in these resources and helping people at the same time. And so that's sort of the push and pull with the governor especially. He's a great governor, but he's a little more focused on holding the line. We're focused on holding the line too, because we don't want to go back to where we came. But on the other hand, I think we want to push a little bit harder, a little bit further, to make sure that we are dealing with some of the impacts of some of the cuts over the tough years.
Congressman, do you have thoughts on how to encourage more Californians to take advantage of benefits to which they're entitled?
Well, I think that's actually a role that we all can play in terms of our organizing, community meetings and stuff that we have. I know when this came to my attention, one of the things I like to do in my district a lot is town halls. And so we did a town hall at the beginning of the year, because I know a lot of people don't know about the Earned Income Tax Credit, and it's one of the most important ways to address poverty, that and actually sign people up for it. And so I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to do that. We need to take the step of not just informing people about it, but having the workshop where people can come and actually get it done. We're doing the same thing around Covered California as well. One of the things about the healthcare that's so scary is that it really is the first time in history that I'm aware of where a party or another force spent hundreds of millions of dollars specifically to confuse people. And so a lot of people in California think the federal website has something to do with California, and it doesn't. We're in good shape here. So I think that's really all of our responsibilities.
But the great beauty of that, too, is you spend the money to confuse people and then complain that everyone's confused.
Exactly.
It kind of works at all levels.
Absolutely.
Let me ask a question from the audience here to either or both of you. As the questioner asks, whatever happened to all the lottery money that was supposed to go to education?
And the kids win too. The lottery money does go to education, and I see Superintendent Torlakson over there. Welcome to you. It does go to education. The problem with the lottery, and this goes back now decades, is it was completely oversold as the solution to education. It's really a very small amount. Now, without the money, we'd be that much shorter. But for decades now, there has been this great expectation that the lottery is going to solve education's problems. Not the case, but I tell you what did solve education's problems, at least for now, was Prop 30, was Proposition 30, because that is a sustained revenue source, at least for, 4 and 7 years. And because of Proposition 98, the surpluses that we're all reading about and experiencing, the vast majority of that is going to go to education. That's a great thing on the one hand. On the other hand, we also need money on the health and human services side. But lottery is, whatever you feel about it, it was never intended to be the panacea, but it was sold that way. What does it generate, Tom? A billion, maybe?
3 to 5% of the 50 billion state K-12 budget.
About $1.5 billion, yeah.
Very good.
Each of you, your thoughts on raising the minimum wage? I mean, there's obviously a school of thought. Clearly, it would deliver benefit to people who are minimum wage earners now. It gets a raise. On the other hand, there's an argument that it might overall limit job growth, that employers would be reluctant to hire more employees if they have to pay them more. What are each of your thoughts on raising the minimum wage?
Well, I think every time the minimum wage gets discussed, that's the argument. And then the minimum wage is raised and nothing happens. I think it's just unconscionable that people work in this country and cannot afford to support themselves. The fact that people work and have food stamps is a terrible problem. Unfortunately, the way the problem is painted is that they're working and having food stamps, so they must be cheating. To me, the fact that they need food stamps and they're working. So, in our country, 21st century, richest country in the world, in the history of the earth, it is just a shame that we cannot provide for the will not provide for the basic needs of our population.
I'm all for it, and we just raised the minimum wage in California to $10 an hour, effective, I believe, in 2015. I guess the only thing I would say, it's not contrary, because I'm all for it, and I'm for raising it even higher. But I don't think it stands alone.
Right.
It's like tax increases in a way. They're necessary, but they're necessary. But the minimum wage is not to the exclusion of being much more aggressive about workforce development and giving people the skills and the background they need to be able to compete for even higher wage jobs. And that goes back to Congresswoman Bass's comment about a holistic approach. We sometimes get stuck on one thing that's very, very important, but it's got to be that consistent investment in human capital, in education and workforce development in a smarter way, I would assert, than how we're doing it now, linking education and the economy together with the higher minimum wage, and I think a lot more people will benefit.
Senator, the California surplus, so it's sort of unexpected now, sudden surplus. How do you make decisions
about how to allocate money now that there's money to allocate. I mean, the court systems are hurting, the public safety, there's a desire to build up the reserve fund. How do these programs stack up in that analysis?
Well, I can tell you the way we did it this last year, which is by definition imperfect, but you have to have a frame. And the frame that we used in our caucus was a third, a third, a third. A third into a rainy day fund, a third to pay down debt, which, by the way, paying down debt creates more money for the general fund and more money to spend, and then a third to invest, and to not use the politically correct term, to spend. And what we had to do in the caucus was recognize that there was probably about $1 billion to add to. And you have the Assembly, of course, and you've got the governor, and you have the Senate, and we all have different priorities. And what we did was, in the Senate, we said, let's take 3 discrete priorities. And as the leader, I helped my caucus, I think, kind of mold them, but there was obviously full input, and we decided we were going to focus on the restoration of dental care for low-income Californians. 800,000 people without dental care. The worst cut that Speaker Bass and I ever had to make, but we got it back.
That's great.
And that was beautiful. We invested $360 million in mental health on top of Prop 63 for crisis stabilization and crisis beds for people and triage workers to get people out of emergency rooms. And then we invested in this linked learning and the 250, but there's so much more to do. And we got to go through it again this year. I know Senator DeSonia and I are both very passionate about autism and making sure that kids on Medi-Cal get the early behavioral therapy they need to have better life outcomes. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick 2 or 3 things, recognizing that even though the big surplus number looks big, when you take away the rainy day necessity, the pay down debt necessity, there's not going to be that much. And we got to have to just be wise about it, but build back that safety net, reinvest in some good things. The Assembly, I'm sure, will do the same thing. Preschool is going to be definitely the top priority in the Senate. And slowly you'll look back, hopefully after 5 years, and you say, look at the 15 things we were able to put back and invest in. The hope.
We are almost out of time, but we have one more question from the audience that seems directed to you, Congressman. Can you talk about the federal budget compromise and the effect that it may have on safety programs? On safety net programs?
Sure. Well, the compromise that was reached a few days ago, and the Senate, actually I haven't heard the news today, but I know the Senate is in session and is supposed to vote this week. I think that they will be able to pull it off, although the Senate's kind of gotten crazy like the House. So anyway, it's kind of no telling, and the process over there is different. But the good news about the budget is that there was some relief in sequestration. So sequestration, and I do have to tell you that I was one of those that didn't think there was any way sequestration would really be implemented. The reason why I didn't was because of the cuts that were going to take place to the defense side. And sequestration, for everybody, called for across-the-board devastating cuts, both in discretionary spending as well as defense spending. And that was the hammer that we put on over our heads last year to get us to come to some grand bargain over the broader deficit. They didn't come to a grand bargain, so the hammer fell on both heads, defense and discretionary. And so this budget called for a little bit of relief in that, but not significant. And so I was in a dilemma. I like the fact that it created some relief on the discretionary side, but the fact that it also ended the unemployment extension, I just couldn't reconcile that. So I don't think that anything is going to change in that regard. Now, one of the problems with the budget is that it is a budget that lasts 2 years. So now through the appropriation process, they will figure out how actually that money is going to be spent. But the next hammer that falls on us is in mid-February, and that's whether or not the debt ceiling is raised.
Debt ceiling again.
Well, we are just about out of time. I want to say, just take a moment to thank all of you, especially for being here and participating in this conference, to Conway and Grace and Bob Ross for hosting. And I really want you to join me in thanking our panelists. So these are 2 really good.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.